Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends. Today I want to give some historical insight into the Glorious Revolution, which resulted in the signing of the English Bill of Rights. And these rights are still pertinent today. During this lockdown, where the government's been totally trampling all across the rights of British citizens, I think it's important now that we start reminding ourselves of what our rights are, where they came from, communicating them to all our fellow citizens, and strengthening them. With this lockdown, the government's going to realise if it gets away with no consequences, they're going to realise they can continue to trample on the rights of British citizens, and they won't be stopping here. They'll be continuing to violate the law going forward, and we as the British people will just have fewer and fewer rights and poorer and poorer lives, and that's not what we want. So we need to make sure we educate ourselves on what our rights are and where they came from. So the Glorious Revolution, which took place in England from 1688 to 1689, involved the ousting of King James II. He was eventually replaced by his daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange, who formed a joint monarchy and lived in Hampton Court, which is not too far from where I am. Part of this settlement included signing of the English Bill of Rights, which was formerly known as an act declaring the rights and liberties of the subjects and settling the succession of the crown. Among its many provisions, the Bill of Rights condemned King James II for abusing his power and declared that the monarchy could not rule without the consent of Parliament. So, what is in the Bill of Rights? Let's have a look. Some of the key liberties and concepts laid out in the articles include the following. Freedom to elect members of Parliament without the King or Queen's interference. I like to think that's still the case today. A lot of these political parties have what's called a parliamentary assessment board to vet candidates, just so they so they know that they can be trusted to go to the people, when what it should be is the candidates should go to the people first and then go to Parliament once elected. Of course, individuals can form their own parties, so I think that's still in place today. Freedom of speech is a very, very important provision in the Bill of Rights. I think that's something that's getting very far too easily eroded in our public discourse. People are criticised heavily for politically incorrect speech or speech that's not approved by the government, and as many of you have seen, they can lose their jobs, they can lose their income, they can be subject to social shaming. You very rarely see in the news journalists writing articles talking about things and emphasising that individual has the right to freedom of speech. So whatever they said, it's within their right to freedom of speech, which is in the Bill of Rights. You very rarely see that, and I think it's incumbent upon us to remind all our citizens, all the press, all of us, to emphasise that anyone who's speaking has the right to freedom of speech. And of course, it's only when people are using disagreeable speech that this issue arises. When it's agreeable speech by the government, no one has a problem with it. Moving back to the provisions, freedom from royal interference with the law, freedom to petition the king, freedom to bear arms for self-defence. I think this is something that we need to heavily strengthen. This provision was totally eroded by the the Firearms Act of 1920, and it's been gradually eroded since. The reason I want to strengthen this is because a police state hates an armed citizenry, and I never want any violence to occur. But I think any threats and violence right now in our country are not coming from our fellow citizens, they're coming from the government. Next provision, freedom from cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail. So I think that provision totally highlights the fact that unlawful house arrest is against the law, and government obviously knows that. They're not worried about any consequences from mass arrest of the entire population. Next provision is freedom from taxation by royal prerogative without the agreement of Parliament. We also have freedom of fines and forfeitures without trial. Any citizens that are during the lockdown have been fined or given penalties for violating self-distancing rules I think that's a provision you need to be aware of. You do have a right to go to trial, even though the police and the government will probably tell you that you don't. Final bullet point I've got here is freedom from armies being raised during peacetimes. I think there's a lot of conversations we could have about these ununiformed officers that roam around the country in unmarked cars, and then all of a sudden they're flashing police lights. I think all our police and services need to be uniformed and clearly delineated from civilians, and this is all stuff that's come in after the September 11th terrorist attacks to keep us safe. And whether it keeps us safe or not, I think is totally debatable. So I think that this English Bill of Rights, what we need to do with it is we need to strengthen it. And a couple of other ideas that I think we need to include is a total unequivocal right to privacy and freedom from digital surveillance. What's going to happen after this lockdown is there's going to be, hey, we've got to track you with your phone. We've got to make sure you're not interacting with anyone who might be unwell. We've got to track your movements. We've got to track who you're communicating with. And, warrantless searches of your phone data for me are a total threat to personal liberty, and they're not British. And I think we need to enshrine in the Bill of Rights our right to privacy. And there won't be any tolerance of tracking our phone data, our email search data. British people have the total right to freedom of communication with each other without surveillance. We need to re-emphasize the fact that we have freedom of association and freedom of worship. British people can associate with each other whenever they want. They can go to church and worship whenever they want, wherever they want. And there's no place for the government to be interfering in freedom of association. We also need to have, I believe, a very clear and unequivocal right to prosecute the government for violations of citizens' rights. I've found that with the prosecution of Alison Saunders, the government is very, very, very reluctant to get involved or to support this. And, that's because the government don't want to be prosecuted. They don't want to be accountable to the law. They want to break the law if it suits them. And anyone who's got a problem with it, needs to get out of the way, quite frankly. And so we need to really get back to what makes us British. And it's to remind everyone across our country and across the world that we, the people, grant the government their powers. The government does not grant us our freedoms. We're a free people. We need to have the Bill of Rights up in every public space in the country. I know a lot of people go to pubs and bars around Great Britain and they see the big Sky Sports banner going up. And as much as everyone loves Sky Sports, I think it'd be equally pertinent to have a Bill of Rights in every bar, pub and restaurant. And so we're constantly reminding ourselves what our rights are and reminding the government what they are as well. So I hope you like this video. Share it with your friends and let's get the word out there that we need to be strengthening and reminding ourselves all about our rights. So thanks very much.